All right, good evening, everybody. This is your Facebook meteorologist, Sean Bagden here, followed along with your Facebook meteorologist, Derek Centrone. We currently have a live cam up here in, I believe this is Tampa, Florida right now. And as you can see in the center right side of the screen, there is an alligator crossing the street right now.
Yeah,
What
we
caused
have
the
a
alligator to cross the
live
road?
alligator.
No. This
So
is
the
a
only thing
live alligator. This
Okay.
is a
So
live
as your
alligator.
Floridian here, as your resident Floridian here, I have a couple things to say about this. First of all, the only thing that makes this any more Florida than we're seeing right now is if this alligator were to walk into a Waffle House right now. And second thing is if this alligator were to get fought by a crackhead right now. But we're not going to talk about this because I doubt that there's many crackheads on the road right now if we are in the middle of this hurricane.
Oh no, the camera's rendering, so there's probably one taking the camera down right now as we speak.
Yeah, it's looking for that copper
That's
wire from
besides
the
the
camera.
point. Exactly. Very Florida thing right here. The alligator crossing the screen as we do another live stream of the landfall of Hurricane Milton here as flash flood emergencies go in effect across the whole I-4 corridor pretty much at this point. A high-end life-threatening situation is likely unfolding across the Tampa Bay area, north of the I-4 corridor into Orlando, actually, as well. This is a very significant situation that's getting underway. All jokes aside with the alligator going across the live feed right now. But we're going to be breaking down some radar. We're also going to be talking about potential East Coast impacts that Milton is going to be having as we go in through the morning hours tomorrow. And once we're able to get the radar up and models, we will start going over everything for you guys step by step, and we'll try to stay live as long as we can here to break down the current situation across Florida as a significant wind and surge and now flash flood emergency threat is emerging across the central peninsula of Florida. Anything you want to add on to this live feed about the alligator, Derek, before we go into radar imagery?
Yes. So we do have two kinds of flooding starting across Florida right now. We do have our storm surge, which is being seen as far north as Tampa in our Tampa Bay, as far south as south of Sarasota. That's where the priority or our majority of our sorry. It's been a long night. You guys know I've been on the live stream earlier tonight. I am completely burnt out. But anyway, that's where the majority of our storm surge is being seen right now, just off on our barrier islands near Sarasota, just south of Sarasota, into those areas. That's where our flooding is being seen right now, but we're also starting to see about 12 plus inches of rain starting to fall along that track as Milton pushes into central Florida, eventually into eastern Florida. And that's where we're going to start to see that double digit rainfall and that freshwater flooding, that inundation in areas such as Orlando, Daytona Beach eventually. Especially as it moves into the east coast of Florida, we're going to start to see that 1 to 3 feet of storm surge. That contraflow is really going to start to bring that flooding out around there. And this isn't going to look much better on the East Coast than it does on the West Coast right now. Do you have anything to add to that, Sean?
Yes, absolutely. Let me actually get this down to one panel here real quick so we can see the whole swath. That is your flash flood emergency that is currently in effect across most of the I-4 corridor right now. Huh?
Are you sharing your screen?
I am trying to, yes. Screen sharing.
Okay, interesting. I'm currently lagged out on my screen.
Okay. Well, besides the point, I do see it on the screen, so I'm going to keep rolling until you see it here. But we do have the flash flood emergency that just went into effect across and just north of the I-4 corridor. We're closely watching this band here associated with what used to be the eye wall of Hurricane Milton. It probably still is. It's just very elongated and sheared out right now. But something I am very interested / nervous about here is the potential for a deformation band to set up right here over the Gulf Coast of Florida, all the way up through Hermosa Springs, the villages, and then kind of remain stationary here. You can see this area of enhanced reflectivity starting to set up right now across the Gulf Coast, and I'm thinking that that is part of that deformation band. What is causing that? There's a trough axis out here, the one that pushed it into Florida, pushed Milton into Florida here, and that is likely going to be the lifting mechanism as Milton is able to push Atlantic and Gulf moisture right into that trough axis. It's likely going to set up a near stationary band of heavy rain in already plagued areas by heavy rain in the Tampa area, Clearwater area, and especially up through Brooksville, Florida here, potentially even Hermosa Springs, but we're not as worried about up there as the eye wall band did not quite affect those areas. We're mostly worried about within 50 miles of the I-4 corridor here. That is extremely worrying. We'll likely see videos and photos in the morning of houses completely inundated, high water rescues, and all of the above occurring pretty much straight up the I-4 all the way into almost Daytona here. Would not be surprised as the eye wall band here of Milton makes its way on up to the east-northeast here. Definitely a very scary situation taking hold across the central Florida peninsula here. Already 12 to 15 inches of rain, as Derek said, along and north of the I-4 corridor here. And we are likely to see even more significant rainfall totals as this deformation band potentially sets up here along the Gulf Coast. And this is going to follow and intensify as Milton moves off to the east-northeast here, likely looking at the most significant flooding along I-4 here as that eye wall band and the deformation band will follow each other pretty solidly right up through the I-4 here. Looking like Orlando is also about to get in on the significant flash flooding as well. So you are not out of the woods. It looks like the high winds, extreme winds even, you might even see gusts up near 80, 90, 100 miles an hour in Orlando once we start getting this jet interaction here with Milton as this moves off to the east-northeast here. And we could definitely see increasing winds with this eye wall feature as it heads into the Orlando area. And of course, flash flood emergencies will likely be going into effect in the Orlando area, as well as, of course, the Tampa, Lakeland, Dade City, Clearwater, down to Bradenton areas. I'm going to stop for now on that, and I'll have Derek continue to break this down.
Yes, I just want to offer a reminder to everybody who's around this area right now and in the projected path of the storm. Just because the storm is not hitting you now does not mean you're out of the woods yet. This storm is moving east-northeast and is expected to make an exit just over the Space Coast. And if you're not experiencing those hurricane force gusts yet, that does not mean you're out of the woods. Do not go to bed. Do not expect that this is going to pass, and do not expect that this is any old tropical storm. You're still in for those hurricane force gusts. You're still in for that extreme flooding, and you're still in for even a tornado or two as this thing moves more towards your location. So stay vigilant, stay up, stay awake, and get ready to move to those inner rooms of your house, the inner closet, anything that's far away from outdoor windows, outside walls, and be ready to respond to any kind of tornado threat. If you have any kind of flooding, get ready to move to a second floor. Get ready to seek higher ground. Anything you possibly can to get away from either the tornado or the flooding threat, even a high wind threat. If you did not evacuate from the storm and you're still inside your house with these high winds that are going to be coming into your area, this is not something to be taken lightly. And just because you're not in the landfall area of this storm, this does not mean you're out of the woods for a potential extreme wind event, tornado event, or flooding event.
Absolutely. And just to highlight a comment here that we just got from Urumet. Buenas noches, excelente trabajo, saludos desde Uruguay. He's saying great job, everybody, and keep on going from Uruguay. But as we continue looking at this storm and continuing to do a great job, thank you, Oromet there. We are still watching the wraparound of this eye wall as winds start to turn to the south and west into the Tampa Bay here. We're closely watching the comeback of the surge into Tampa Bay. As we did of that slight negative surge earlier, we're watching that water surge back into Tampa Bay right now. We were seeing the Weather Channel going live a little bit earlier, and you could clearly see the water just surging up into the bridges there, also into the parking garages, down to the lower levels there. And definitely seeing a higher surge in Tampa now than they did see during Helene. According to Jim Cantori there, they are seeing that surge start to wrap in, especially as they're starting to get those more southwesterly winds on the backside of the hurricane here. So definitely something to note with this. Again, Tampa certainly not out of the woods yet, and this is likely when we're about to start seeing the maximum storm surge in the Tampa Bay area. So definitely, even though the winds are weakening, do not put your card down in Tampa at all, because that coastal water, that salt water, is surging in, while all of that flash flood emergency water here, that 12 to 15 inches and still falling rainfall totals, are trying to make their way out. They're meeting right at the deltas of all these rivers in Tampa Bay, and we will likely continue to see storm surge rises, especially along the deltas of these rivers here, as we're trying to get water exiting and water entering Tampa Bay all at the same time. So definitely a very serious situation about to unfold in Tampa Bay, if not already unfolding. We're going to probably keep this live going all the way until we start getting flash flood emergencies across the state into Orlando here. We're going to try to keep this going as long as we can for you guys. Just a quick update on wind reports here from GR2 Analyst, which we're using for our radar right now. We do have a 60-mile-an-hour wind gust with damage reported just to the northeast of Orlando, and also a 65-mile-an-hour wind gust with damage reported on the confluence of the I-4 and 95 on the east coast of Florida here, up by the Daytona area, and that is likely to increase. And I'll actually have Derek break down the current GFS that we got in here, on showing how we're likely to see these winds increase on the East Coast as we start to go through extratropical transition here with Milton.
So I have a couple things to say here. First of all, one thing I want to say to anybody who lives around the Tampa area, this flooding and this storm surge is not going to end when the storm starts to push off. Something you have to keep in mind is we did see a little bit of negative storm surge earlier today, and what you have to keep in mind is if you live along that northern side of that surge, is the return of that water once this surge starts to go positive again. So there is a very good chance that once the storm starts to push off to the east, if you do return to your house and you do return to your pretty much your normal life along the west coast of Florida, that you will be seeing that water return to the Tampa Bay really, really quickly. I mean, we're already seeing a little bit of surge in that area, so it shouldn't be as bad as if it was going to be completely negative surge. But that's something to keep in mind. Is we did see negative surge earlier today, so there is going to be a little bit of return flow back into the Tampa Bay, and that comes on really quickly. So if you're in those areas, you have to keep that in mind as a potential flooding effect within a couple days from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Derek, as somebody who's a little bit more familiar with Florida topography, we did just have a question come in from Michelle saying that her daughter is in Claremont in a mobile home, and she's wondering what the conditions are going to be like over in Claremont as we go through time.
All right, so Claremont is in the Orlando metro area. Here, let me just pull it up on the map so I can see where its location is relative to some bodies of water here. Claremont. So Claremont is between a few rivers here, or not rivers, lakes rather. Sorry, it's been a long night. Claremont's in between a couple lakes here, so that brings one big thing into question: is if we do get that 1 to 2 feet of freshwater flooding in here, those lakes are going to rise, and I don't exactly know where those lakes are going to rise to relative to where um, certain developments are, but if anybody you know is on those in any of those developments near those bodies of water, make sure that they are taking shelter and make sure that they have a plan in case if those bodies of water do rise. If they're not in direct proximity to any of those bodies of water, yes, street flooding can happen, but the good news is Claremont does not seem to be in a major zone for any kind of storm surge or anything like that. So it's mostly just based on where people are to the lakes and ponds, because something else in Florida is there's a lot of HOA ponds. A lot of homeowners associations and gated communities like to have ponds, and those ponds are man-made. They're not very well zoned, they're not very well built, and they can flood very quickly. So even if these very, very large bodies of water, these lakes, do not overflow, if you do live in an HOA and you do have a pond there, those can very, very quickly overflow. So it's very hard to make a call for one person in any of these Orlando suburbs because of those ponds, because of those lakes. There's a very, very, very steep gradient from completely fine to completely underwater. So it's very important, if you do have family member, this doesn't just go from people who are leaving questions, this goes to people who are watching this stream right now. If you have family members that are in the Orlando metro and the Daytona metro, any of these areas, that you reach out to your family members specifically and ask them, do you have ponds near you? Do you have rivers near you? Do you have the ocean near you? Because that makes the difference between you being completely fine, being completely dry, and just having a little bit of a wind event here, and just getting your average tropical storm experience. Or are you going to be completely underwater and having that quote unquote storm of a century experience with the flooding? So make sure, if you have family in those areas, that you're asking them those questions. Location to water. What's happening outside? How much wind are you getting? Because those questions are going to be the difference between your family experiencing the storm of the century or just a normal tropical storm in Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a couple flood gauges pulled up here for the areas just to the north and east of Orlando. A lot of them do not have any data coming from these monitors for any reason or another, but we do have three major lakes and rivers here across and just north of the I-4 that we can look at to just give you an idea of what sort of flooding we're looking at here. We are looking at currently action stage right now across the St. Johns River near Lake Harney in Florida. And this is likely to reach a record 2 major crest over the next several hours, if not the next 24 hours here. That is also the same for the Little Wekiva River near Altamonte. here just north of Orlando, and also moderate flooding currently expected across the St. Johns River near Sanford, near the airport up there. So definitely very interesting. We need to keep an eye out on this area, especially given there's a high risk for flash flooding across the area. Anyone, again, north of that I-4 corridor there, Orlando and north, definitely the potential for major to record crests happening here through the next 24 to 48 hours for sure. Larger rivers probably going to be a little bit after the storm crests here.
Yeah, and I do want to add to that,
Go
Sean,
ahead.
is you can see where this area. Sorry, did I cut you off? Didn't mean to.
No, you're fine. Go for it.
Um, is you can see where this area is relative to the bodies of water, and that just proves my point earlier that this is a very, very, very sporadic flash flooding kind of area, where this isn't going to be this is not going to be an area that you would expect widespread flash flooding. This isn't going to look like Asheville, where you have an entire area influenced by topography just to be completely wiped out. This all has to do with your proximity to bodies of water, and some streets will be flooded, some won't be. Some areas will be
Derek, hold on. We just got very major breaking information.
Oh boy, let's see this.
We have currently just got a flash flood emergency issued for Kissimmee, Orlando, Deltona, all the way up to DeLand as well as Lavares.
Okay, that ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that this is really, really close to home for me. This is this is the county that I go to school in right now. So seeing flash flood warnings go as far as Deltona and DeLand, like that's 20 minutes from where I go to school right now. So if everybody can just like take a second for my friends that stayed there through the storm, like that would be amazing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, perfect. And I'm going to pull up actually the radar right now just for anybody watching that is in the Orlando area north of the I-4, just so you can see exactly where this flash flood emergency has been issued right now across the area. We're currently looking at this area right up here. Just went into effect a flash flood emergency just off and along the I-4 corridor here. And again, several more high wind gust reports with damage as well along the I-4 corridor. This is likely to increase in intensity and threat as the eye wall of Milton makes its way across the Florida peninsula here. Actually really picking up speed at this point and intensity. So the good thing about the speed of this is we'll likely see a little bit less rainfall over the northern part of I-4 here near Orlando. But the problem is the damage has already been done. The rain is down, and the flash flooding, usually when you get a flash flood emergency, is already occurring. We're already getting high water rescues reported across Orlando and north of the northern end of the I-4 here. So extremely dangerous, life-threatening situation ongoing here across the central Florida peninsula as we speak. And it does look like we just got a 75-mile-an-hour wind gust report out of the eye wall inland, which is quite impressive to get hurricane force gusts out of an eye wall inland, which only makes me imagine what we're going to see in terms of wind gusts along the East Coast here, pretty much from Daytona up to the Palm Coast. I also have family that live up in Palm Coast, so this is certainly something that is hitting close to home for me as well as Derek here. So definitely something both of us are closely watching as well. I do believe the eastern coast of Florida is going to be impacted quite a bit more than people are expecting by overall impacts from flash flooding all the way up to the storm surge, as we are already getting onshore flow here, especially north of Daytona and north on I-95 here, all the way up to probably even Jacksonville at this point. So going to see a long stretch of onshore flow here, as you can see these rain bands coming from east to west onshore here. That's that onshore flow that'll likely produce 3 to 5 feet of storm surge wherever this northern eye wall ends up crossing out into the ocean. We'll likely see more than 5 feet of storm surge. We might even see 7 feet of storm surge coming into Daytona Beach, which certainly was not anticipated as this event was about to unfold. But just by the looks of it right now, how healthy this eye wall looks, I would not be surprised to see 5 to 7 feet of surge coming into the Daytona area, especially on the morning high tide cycle coming up here.
Yeah,
anything you want to add on to that?
I do have a few things I want to add on to this. The National Hurricane Center's cone is going pretty much due east across the state with an exit by Palm Bay. Based on the relative motion of the storm right now, I do not expect the storm to be exiting over just due east of where it currently is. I do expect it to be pulling slightly to the northeast, exiting maybe over Titusville or New Smyrna Beach, even as far north as that. Did you mean to stop sharing there?
I did not mean to stop sharing there. I'm going to figure that out real quick. It looks like the app crashed, but I'll work on getting that up as you're talking here.
Yeah. So because the storm is pulling slightly north of where the National Hurricane Center has been saying it's going to go throughout today, I do expect it to pull slightly north of even where it's at now and exit through between Titusville and New Smyrna Beach. It could pull slightly south of that, but that's kind of where I'm expecting it to exit Florida. And if that happens, the onshore flow of the storm is going to really ramp up that storm surge up north of Daytona and even down into Daytona. And that's going to do two things that I'm looking at right now. That's going to keep the storm surge on the shore looking pretty violent compared to where it was supposed to be. And it's also going to improve that moisture return as that frontal system interacts with this, at that point, likely tropical storm or weak hurricane, and really keep those rain values coming in. And that's why we're seeing some of those rain values being higher than they currently are right now over Orlando, is because that easterly flow over the Daytona area is going to be bringing in those higher dew points, bringing in that more moisture. And as that interacts with that frontal boundary, that's going to be increasing the rain values in there and really racking up that
Derek,
rainfall value. What?
We just got even worse news coming in from the National Weather Service.
Oh boy, why every time do I say bad news does there have to be worse news?
Yes. At this point, before I pull this up, I'm gonna let you guys know what it is. We currently have either flash flood emergencies or flash flood warnings now across a 200-mile swath from coast to coast on the central peninsula of Florida.
Oh my God.
It has gone coast to coast in a 200-mile wide swath right now. I'm going to pull up this radar image and you're going to see what we're talking about. We have flash flood emergencies going right here across the center of the peninsula here, all the way from the northern end of the I-4 through Orlando, down through Tampa, all the way through flash flood emergencies, likely high water rescues going on right now in these areas, if rescuers are even able to reach these areas given the high winds. And then we have flash flood warnings, which may become flash flood emergencies, reaching all the way down to Melbourne here. Melbourne, Florida, up to Titusville, through now. Under flash flood warnings at this time, even up into Ocala now. Flash flood warnings are currently being issued And as this deformation band we were talking about early starts to intensify here, you can start seeing it starting to gain its shape. We're likely going to see these flash flood warnings turn into flash flood emergencies, especially on the northern end. The southern end here, not so worried about widespread flash flooding, as that is in the drier southern end of the storm. But I would not be surprised if some of these more northerly flash flood warnings here get upgraded to flash flood emergencies, as there is definitely potential for high water rescues being needed up there and widespread flash flooding occurring across those areas. Definitely a very concerning development happening live right now across the central peninsula of Florida.
Yeah, something I want to add on to that right now is that anybody who lives in Florida that's watching this stream right now, you know how volatile these areas are to just normal street flooding from normal storms. Living in Daytona Beach for 3 years now, I've seen normal storms come in. You know those Gulf bombs you get sometimes where you have just enough moisture to flood the streets, a day full of rain, flooding the streets out. Oh, that puddle's a little bit too big to drive through. This is completely different. This is entire streets flooded out. These are your rivers overflowing. These are your lakes overflowing. These are your HOA ponds overflowing. If you are in these areas right now, please have another plan. If you are anywhere along any of these flash flood emergencies or you're near any of these flash flood emergencies, this is it. There is no more time for you to come up with a plan. Execute your emergency plan, do it now, and have a way out of the system because there is no more time. Daytona Beach, you are next. Daytona, Flagler, St. Johns County, even as far up as Duval County. Have your plan in place right now and execute that as soon as possible because you're not going to have a way out of this flooding. Streets are probably going to have as much as a foot to a foot and a half, even 2 feet of flooding with the system. And if you are not prepared for that, you are unfortunately not going to make it out of this. This is a very, very serious situation for inland Florida right now. And that is coming from somebody who's been through these floods. This is coming from somebody who's driven through these floods. And this is coming from somebody who has seen houses get completely washed out by these floods.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Florida here, something Derek and I were talking live, or not live about, off the air about flooding across Florida is how it's different than the Helene flooding here. Helene, there was plenty more water. You had it rushing down the mountains, but the thing is it was out quick. Once the rain stopped and the flooding stopped running down the mountains, there wasn't enough water coming back into the rivers to continue flooding them. It was done. The water left. The devastation was left. With this storm here, you don't have mountains to clear this water out. And we do have waterlogged soils in this case from all the 2 tropical waves that came in before this storm. And there's no way for this water to run off in Florida. There's no hills, there's no mountains, there's nothing. The water that's there is going to be there until either the ground can absorb it or the sun can evaporate it. So this water and flooding will likely be lasting for a significantly longer time. It may not be as significant as Helene flooding up in North Carolina, but it will be lasting a lot longer. That water is going to be sitting around a lot longer than it was with Helene. So it'll make recovery efforts, rescue efforts, anything of those sorts a lot more difficult with this storm after it moves on through.
Yes, and I have a few more things I want to add on to that is multiple sheriff's offices across Florida have already reported that they are ceasing their emergency responses due to 50-plus-mile-an-hour winds. I expect that that is a widespread phenomenon across multiple Florida emergency districts here. Multiple counties are probably going to be following in very, very similar protocols here. So if you're in the path of these storms, you should not expect emergency response to be coming to you if you are having these emergencies. If you're trapped, if you're having a medical emergency, if there's a fire, I would not expect these emergency responses to be coming to your house, whether that's fire, police, medical. You cannot expect these to be coming as if it's a normal day. This is an emergency for them as much as it's an emergency for you. So if you're currently trapped and you're looking for help, you cannot expect that right now. You could be waiting days for this help to be coming to you.
Yeah, definitely, especially if you're along that I-4 corridor like we're talking about and just north of it, where the most intense conditions are right now, with potentially 75 plus mile an hour wind gusts occurring across this area, those flooding conditions occurring, those flash flood emergencies occurring, high water rescues occurring. Definitely do not expect any medical or rescue help at this time, as it is very dangerous. You're putting the your life and the rescuer's life in the hands of whatever is happening out there right now, which is nothing good at this time. So that is why they are not doing any rescues. They really don't want to risk the lives of their emergency personnel, as they're likely going to need them for all these recovery efforts that are going to be needed. We likely need to spare these emergency personnel so they can help out afterwards. It's not worth helping the people that were told to evacuate that didn't evacuate at this time. As terrible as that is to say, if you were told to evacuate, you should have evacuated, and the emergency personnel are not obligated to help you because you made a bad decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in extended is that flash flood warning all the way to the East Coast right now, all the way through the Space Coast up through Volusia County, where that flash flood warning ends, and it extends up to another flash flood warning in southern Flagler County. This is pretty much covering the entire East Coast right now, the entire Northeast Coast, all the way through Palm Bay, um, north of Flagler County, and almost up to Duval County at this point. So if you're in the east coast of Florida, and especially in that northeast coast of Florida right now, you should expect these floods to really be impacting you within the next couple hours.
Yeah, absolutely. That completely makes sense right now. But since right now we don't have anything at this point to talk about additionally on radar, how about we go into the models and talk about how this system is expected to impact the east coast of Florida, and on its trajectory that it's on right now, potentially even coastal Carolinas could be getting in on some light storm surges as well, correct, Eric?
Yeah, light storm surges and maybe a couple inches of rain as far as I've looked at before. I know I had one question earlier on my live stream of the impacts on coastal South Carolina. It doesn't look particularly intense. Especially since the GFS models have shifted a little bit off to the east, but we cannot expect that easterly shift because the storm seems to be moving to the northeast right now, a little bit north of where that GFS model is carrying it. So let's go over what the impacts into especially coastal South Carolina and Georgia are going to be experiencing with the storm.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is currently where the GFS does have Hurricane Milton right now. Looking pretty accurate. It could be a little bit north and east of this right
Hey, you
now.
probably should share that.
Oh, that would be good, because then all of you would not know a thing of what I'm talking about. So let me
Yeah.
stop sharing the radar right now, and we will pull you on over to what I'm looking at. We have the 850 millibar winds for Hurricane Milton here across Florida. It is currently in a pretty accurate position. It likely is a little bit more north and east than this at this time. But what we're looking at here is the main wind pattern that exists around Milton at this time. As you can see, at the 850 level, we were talking about this a little bit earlier on, a couple days ago, I believe. But you do see this acceleration of wind here on the northwestern quadrant of the storm. This is likely to intensify as Milton moves off to the north and east, and the trough that's pushing it north and east starts to move south towards the storm. This little area of compression between the trough and Hurricane Milton here will likely increase surface winds and the low level jet here as Milton makes its way to the east coast of Florida, which will be quite interesting to watch. This will likely lead to enhanced wind damage in areas, I would say, from Daytona north through even the Jacksonville area up to the Georgia border here. Likely seeing high-end hurricane force winds here. It's not really showing it as strong as other runs, but I'd imagine there's a strong band of high winds that will exist only a couple thousand feet off the ground here. And especially during the afternoon when you do get the sun energy to warm up the boundary layer, we'll likely see these winds mix down to the surface. Let's have a quick look at a sounding here across the Palm Coast area. And you can see we do have that inversion in place just below that, that low-level jet here. But during the afternoon hours, we'll likely see this break and rise up this inversion level. And given the highly negative omega here in the lower levels of the atmosphere where that low-level jet exists, we'll likely see these let me see what the values are on these winds here. 80, 85 knot winds aloft, only a couple thousand feet aloft, making it down to the surface here in a east to west flow across the coast of Florida here. That would bring it up to a high-end Category 1 hurricane impact across a wide swath of Florida here as the wind field expands overnight tonight from Jacksonville down to Daytona, likely, maybe even down to the Titusville area as well. Likely going to see increased storm surge impacts across the Jacksonville through the Daytona area here, especially through the early to late morning hours tomorrow as this low-level jet starts to really increase as we get this kind of squeezing happening between Hurricane Milton and the trough axis that's pushing it out to sea.
Yeah, exactly. And I went over that during my live today, that kind of squeezing effect and how that was going to really impact north of the I-4 corridor here. And we're starting to see that a little bit with some of those gusts you talked about earlier. And I think it's going to be a little bit of time before we start to see even more of an impact of that. But as of tomorrow, that's when I'm really starting to look at that, because that squeezing of that impact from the Atlantic into the peninsula of Florida, that's really going to impact that moisture return from the Atlantic. And that's when I'm thinking that some of that rain is really going to start. Do you have anything to say about that, Sean?
Actually, one thing before we do get into that, we do have a question. Well, not really a question, but a statement from Lacey Breaker right now. She has family in Ormond, and I'm guessing she wants to know what is going to be happening as this storm moves through the peninsula of Florida to her family in Ormond. Are they going to be seeing impacts?
I
Are
can
they
take
going
that
to be
over if
seeing
you're looking
flooding?
for it.
Huh?
I said I can take that over if you want me to, because I'm very, very familiar with the Ormond area, the Daytona area, and even north into Palm Coast.
Of course. Let's hear your take on Ormond.
So it really depends as far as Ormond goes. Ormond is a pretty big area as far as impacts go. More coastal Ormond, I would expect that surge impact, but pretty much throughout all of Ormond, I would still expect the freshwater rain impact. There's a lot of those kind of HOA lakes that I was talking about earlier. Um, that impacts areas of Ormond. There's a lot of lakes and areas that can be impacted by storm surge. So it really depends on the individual area of Ormond that you're referring to. Um, but I do expect there to still be a lot of flooding, especially north of the Daytona area, which would include Ormond, Flagler, and other areas right along there. So it doesn't look amazing, but it also doesn't look horrible, I would say. This isn't as bad as Tampa or Sarasota or those other areas, but I would say expect category 1 to category 2 force wind gusts. I would say expect freshwater flooding at about a foot, maybe a little bit over a foot, especially if you're exposed to those standing bodies of water around that area, because they do exist really frequently around there. And around the coast, expect those storm surge values to be on the higher end of what's predicted.
Yeah,
Do you have anything else
absolutely.
to add to
That
that,
sounds
Sean?
like a pretty good response. So yeah, that sounds pretty accurate to me. Also, one question I'd have for Lacey is, uh, if your family in Ormond, are they at a beach house or are they a little bit more in the center, or where are they in Ormond here? Because then we could be talking about storm surge impacts, especially if they're on a beach house. But if they're a little bit more central, then we'll likely be talking more about that pond flooding sort of issue, flash flooding sorts of issues. It really depends where they are on Ormond. If you could let us know where they are, then we could give an even more exact answer for you. But that was really good. She says, that's what I was afraid of. They're about maybe 6 blocks from the ocean.
Whoa, just in from Mike's weather page, the Tampa Bay Rays just lost their roof.
Tampa Bay Rays, okay. Tampa Bay Rays just lost their roof, and I do remember seeing a picture there. They did have cots, thousands of cots lined up in there. Is that correct?
I didn't see the picture that you were looking at, so I'm going to take your word for that. But if they do have a shelter in there, I feel really bad for those people because that roof just absolutely came off.
That we'd be looking at a pretty similar situation to almost a superdome there, with just a lot of stranded people in there, getting wet and potentially sick from whatever is up on the roof there and whatever's circulating around in the air inside that stadium. It is likely not a good situation going on in the Tampa Bay Rays stadium at this time, as it sounds like the roof has completely blown off. But going back to Lacey's question here, they're about 6 blocks from the ocean. Do you think the surge is going to make it up? Make it up about that far?
6 blocks from the ocean, that is right along the boundary of where I would say that that weaker surge along the East Coast could make it. Do I think that the surge is going to make it? It's possible. I think it's unlikely. Um, I think that you should prepare for surge, but expect it not to come at
Yeah,
the same time.
absolutely. I would completely agree with that, because definitely you do have that onshore flow coming into Ormond, but again, you're not looking at as significant of a fetch as we are looking at with when it made its initial landfall into the southern Tampa Bay metro here. You don't have that Cat 5 energy still lingering within the ocean over on the Atlantic side. So you'll likely see storm surge that you would see with a category 1 to potentially category 2 hurricane as it makes its way out into the ocean, because it's not carrying that extra energy with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. So do you want to continue breaking down what you were saying with the model here as we go through time?
Yeah, we were talking about the squeezing of that wind, right?
Yeah, we were talking about the compression between Milton and the trough axis coming in.
So, we're gonna probably start to see this in the next couple hours. Is the trough compressing that wind between Milton and the trough, and that wind is gonna start to escalate ever so slightly, mostly in the lower to mid levels. And as Sean was saying earlier, that all depends on where this happens relative to that inversion layer. If this happens above that inversion, it probably won't reach the surface, but a lot of models have been showing that this is going to happen below that inversion layer or into tomorrow afternoon when that inversion starts to erode slightly. And as that happens, we're expecting for that inversion to reach the surface. And if that is able to happen, we can see that jets start to reach the surface, and we can see those category 1+ winds really start to reach the surface. And what I was saying before when Sean interrupted me with that breaking news earlier is that if those winds are starting to come from the east or the northeast from the Atlantic, as that frontal boundary interacts with the system with that easterly onshore flow, that's really going to bring those dew points into the system and increase the moisture in the air as that moisture is lifted and condensed over the frontal boundary. And that's going to increase those rainfall totals across the east coast of Florida from Daytona northward. Do you have anything to add to that, Sean?
Um, so that completely makes sense there. Um, I'm still waiting on an answer of a question I just asked here, and then we'll bring it up. Okay, here we go. Just to kind of interrupt you again,
Oh
we
boy.
do have Tiffany Hunter here saying she has a friend with no power, and she's wanting to know how much longer until the storm passes. These family members or these friends are down in the Tampa region right now.
So this storm should just have a couple more hours on it in Tampa before we start to see those impacts push slightly further to the east here. But at the same time, I really don't know how long it's going to take to restore power into parts of Tampa. This could take days because this is going to be a huge operation. This requires all of the collaboration of all of the line guys we have here in Tampa from other states across the entire United States. And I just have to say, if you are watching this right now and you are a line guy working for a power company, anything FPL, anybody, thank you right now. You are doing God's work right now. You are amazing.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you for all of the great work you've done through Helene, now through Milton, and through any other systems we have. Thank you for everything you've done. But
And
as far as power goes,
especially to the ones that have been coming from states far and wide. I mean, I know there's some line guys coming all the way down from Vermont. They're coming from Washington. They're coming from all over to help Florida out in its time of need right now with two landfalling systems, tropical systems, powerful systems needing help with the power grid right now.
yeah, absolutely. And I just want to thank all of them. I remember when I was in Connecticut for Tropical Storm Isius, it's definitely not as strong as this system is right now, but we had line guys all the way from Montreal, Quebec, coming in to help us. So this just reminds everybody who's in on these systems right now, and all of the line guys, anybody who's in the path of these storms, that everybody is trying their best right now to restore power, to restore life back to its normal sense of normalcy. And it
Absolutely.
might take a couple days to get power back. It might take a couple weeks to get power back, depending on where you are. I know a lot of these line people are trying to still repair damage from Helene right now. So restoring damage from Milton might be a little bit of a second priority in some areas. So I just want to remind people to just stay strong, try your best, if possible, get a backup generator, and just push forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you, Tiffany, um, if your family or your friends there are in Tampa, I would imagine they're going to be one of the first priorities to get the power back onto, since it is a highly populated area. And then they'll likely spread out to the less populated areas of Florida here across the middle of the peninsula of Florida. And it does look like the worst conditions in terms of wind and rain have passed the Tampa area at this time. But again, you're slowly going to get that pushback of water coming up through Tampa Bay, and you'll likely see a slight increase in storm surge. But if they are in Tampa Metro, it does look like the surge walls, the barriers are likely going to stand up to this storm, as surge was not as high as expected in Tampa Bay. So if they're in the main center of Tampa Bay, likely not going to be a problem, that comeback of surge, that return flow. So definitely, I think as long as you heard from them through the eye wall that they're okay, I'd imagine they're okay at this time. But we also do have a question here from Diane Fisher, which she's looking for a radar over the Brandon area. Can you tell me where the Brandon area is, Derek? I'm not the best with Florida.
All right, let me take a look here at the radar over the Brandon area.
Just so I can move it there.
Let me take a look. Let me just make sure. I know there's really no margin for error here when we're on these streams. Brandon is just pretty much due east of Tampa right now.
And it looks like Tampa.
Looks like the storm is still moving over Brandon. It looks like there could still be some impacts as the storm pushes off to the east.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be saying that as well. It's is it like right around the Lakeland area here?
Yes, it's a little bit to the west of the Lakeland area.
Okay,
it's a little closer to Tampa. It's right in between Lakeland and Tampa right there.
Okay, absolutely. So it does look like the worst of the eye wall has pushed through the Brandon area at this time. Definitely the potential still exists for an intensifying of the flooding that's already occurring, since you are still seeing that moderate rain falling across the Brandon area right now. But that is likely to diminish as we go on through the next couple of hours here. And then I would recommend, as long as whoever it is you're looking after is not underwater by the time the morning comes here, I'd imagine that they're going to be pretty safe as well. But definitely our hearts go out to them right now, because they are under that flash flood emergency. And likely some high water rescues going on in the area. So I can't say for certain right now what the condition of Brandon is. But the conditions are improving in that area, and we'll likely be figuring that out in the next couple of hours here. So hearts go out to whoever is in that area you're looking for. Yeah, we'll keep you updated on the situation over Brandon as we go through time here. And if it's you and Brandon, just make sure you don't have any water coming up to your house. And if you do, just make sure anything that is important in your house is in an elevated area, any keepsakes or anything like that. Because that water likely won't be rising too much more if it hasn't gotten to your house already.
And also have a plan out to have an area that you think you feel comfortable evacuating to, that the water will not be able to reach, whether or not that's on top of some sort of furniture like a couch or a bed or something. If you do have a small amount of water that gets in, you don't want to be standing in that for a long period of time. So if you have something that you can get above that water in to stay dry, or have another way out of your house to get rescued, make sure that you have that plan completely solidified. So if that water does make its way in, you have a way out.
Yeah, absolutely. And another tip, if water is approaching anybody's house that's watching this live stream here, a huge tip, even though it may sound very uncomfortable. I mean, these disaster situations are not meant to be the most comfortable in the world. So I would recommend, if you do have water coming up to your house and you're worried about it getting up to your first floor, as I know a lot of homes in Florida are one-story homes, especially in these HOA communities here. I would recommend having a window open, just so you are able to get out, because if the water is over that window, it is going to be extremely hard to find a way out, and you could be trapped in the home if that window is not open already. So that's another tip for you guys. If you are having water rising up to your house, just equalize that pressure right away. And if water does get high enough that it covers the window, you can easily swim out through the window to potential safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. And one other thing that I just noticed, I know we were talking about that deformation band potentially forming where that air is getting squeezed between Milton and the trough axis here. You can actually clearly see it on the SPC mesoanalysis right here. I'll pull it up for you guys. Can you see that, Derek? Okay. Perfect. It does look like we do have it up on the screen here, but you can see this area of difluence aloft that has developed off to the north and west of the center of Milton here. This is right in front of that trough axis that's starting to push it off to the north and east here, the east-northeast, and this is going to be the focal point for a developing band of heavy rain, likely associated with a coastal front that is developing along the Georgia coastline here and the southern South Carolina coastline, and then down into where the dynamics rapidly get incrementally better here, just to the northwest of Milton. A lot more buoyancy in that area, but likely going to see an increase in rainfall rates here across North Florida here, where rains have not been heavy so far with Milton, or not as heavy, but we'll likely see flash flood warnings with this feature as it intensifies, continue to follow their way up the 95 corridor here into the Savannah area as a stationary deformation band sets up along the coastline, and likely going to see some light surges with that, probably in the 1 to 3 foot range, especially in the concave bays of the Savannah area. Also in the Jacksonville area as well, potentially seeing upwards of that 3 to 5 feet of storm surge associated with that deformation band, that pooling of the higher winds into that area, running into that band, and likely increasing storm surge potential across those concave bays across North Florida and the Georgia coastline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else you want to add on to that, Derek?
There is a little bit of new footage coming out from the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium. The roof is completely gone.
Do you have the source that came from, actually, so I can go find it so we can pull it up on live feed
So
here?
I don't want to get completely demonetized here, but Mike's weather page is sharing it right now, and it is not looking good.
Absolutely. Is this on YouTube or Twitter?
This is on Instagram.
Instagram. Okay, let me pull up Instagram here. You keep talking about the storm, and I'll try to get it pulled up.
Yeah. So yeah, this let's see if there's any other new information coming in on this storm. I know that there's a lot going on right now. As far as flash flood warnings come, a lot of these areas are still under flash flood warnings. Flash flood emergencies have surprisingly not been extended to the East Coast yet. I can expect that those flash flood warnings will eventually be extended to the East Coast into tomorrow as those deformation bands that Sean was referring to start to wrap around and make their way into coastal Florida here. And this is just something to remember is even though the storm already made landfall, the effects are not quite done yet. Because if you live on the east coast of Florida and especially north of the I-4 corridor, even though that these conditions are starting to be felt, these are far from over, especially as far as the flooding effects go. As Sean was saying earlier, these effects will start to be felt later. And that's extremely important to people who I know a lot of people who are in Florida right now who are like, oh, this thing already made landfall. It's good. It's whatever. It's okay. It's like every other storm. This is not the case with this storm. Make sure that you continue to follow local emergency management information. Follow the insight from your community governments and follow guidance from the National Hurricane Center or from us, from anybody right now. Whoever your source of meteorology information is, follow that through this completely exiting Florida because this will continue to bring impacts in Florida until it completely exits the state. Do you have anything to add to that, Sean?
So I was able to pull up a video actually of the Rays Stadium roof collapse here from Seth Weaver, it appears. And it is from a distance across the street here, but you can see how, I don't know what sort of material that is, but it has been completely ripped off half of the roof of the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium here, pretty much clear through to the bottom floor. And that is where over 1,000 people were keeping shelter from the hurricane to be in a surge safe area, wind safe area from their homes. And unfortunately now rain and wind is coming into their what used to be a dry shelter there at the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium. So definitely our hearts go out to those people that were taking refuge in the Tampa Bay Stadium there, which now are completely soaked and wind beaten right now. So definitely hearts go out to them. And we'll have a quick look at what else we have going on here for breaking stories.
Yeah, and to take over from that right now is even though I'm going to school in Daytona right now, um, I have a very, 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 very long history that ties back into the Tampa area. So seeing my home city being completely decimated by parts of this storm, it really hits home. It really does. It really shows that this area is not invincible to these hurricanes and going on a streak of about 100 years of this area not getting hit by storms and not getting affected by storm surge and all these other things. It's like Tampa as a whole has not gotten really impacted by storms. We had Ian that was supposed to hit the Tampa Bay. We've had Debbie that was looking like it was going to hit the Tampa Bay. We had Helene that looked like it was going to hit the Tampa Bay. All these other areas that looked like it was going to have really bad impacts on the Tampa Bay all miraculously missed Tampa. And now we're finally starting to have a little bit of a closer impact. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, this wasn't the impact we were looking for. This wasn't the Cat 4, Cat 5 direct hit into Tampa Bay we were looking at. There was still negative surge. There still wasn't this. There still wasn't that. This really should be a wake-up call for people who are in Tampa and think that you're completely invincible to hurricanes. You're absolutely not. This was a rare storm in a lot of ways. But at the same time, there is absolutely nothing preventing Tampa Bay from experiencing a head-on major hurricane impact straight up into the bay. You guys have gotten lucky. There are very specific scientific explanations for why these storms haven't gotten directly into Tampa Bay. Those are still being researched, and there's a lot of data that's not been proven, but is currently being studied on why those systems like to go slightly north or slightly south of Tampa Bay. But That's not going to last forever. At some point, one of these storms is going to go directly into Tampa Bay, and it's going to cause catastrophic surge. It's going to cause catastrophic winds, and that's just something to keep in mind. Is just because this storm didn't do it to your house, just because this storm didn't do it to your business or your friend's house or your family's house, next time you get a similar warning like this, it's important to take the same precautions. It's important to evacuate. It's important to tell your family to evacuate. It's important to tell your family to take the same precautions because next time could be the time it does it. There's always the next time. And that's important to remember because just because this time didn't do it doesn't mean that Tampa's safe forever. And I want to
Absolutely.
remind
And
that to everybody.
yeah, absolutely. And just keep in mind how close Tampa was in this storm to having a complete storm surge disaster, almost a Katrina type event. It was not more than probably 10 or 15 miles from having about a 15 to 20-foot storm surge running right into those surge barriers in Tampa. And who knows if they'd hold up because they have not been tested for those sorts of surges before. I mean, we've had events come through, but they've been nothing close to that magnitude, what this storm would have been if it was 15 miles north of where it actually made landfall. So I'm certainly glad that we did make a call that it would be a little bit further north, say 15 miles north of where it was, just because it kept those people on guard. Because if this system did go and wobble just a little bit for some reason up to the north a little bit and went to the north side of Tampa Bay, the Clearwater area, St. Pete area, it would have been a completely different situation than what we're dealing with now. It is still quite bad in Tampa, but this is probably the best case scenario we could have asked for out of this storm, the where it did make landfall.
Absolutely.
Definitely. But that is what I have for that right now. Is there anything else you want to cover right now, Derek?
Not particularly. It looks like everything is
Steady state for
pretty
now, right?
steady. If we have an emergency, we will go live again. But as of right now, a lot of this stuff is happening as I covered it earlier in the live. And the flooding impacts are staying pretty steady to what we covered earlier today in this live here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to message us. Comment on any of our posts. We'll feel free to answer any of them. But
Absolutely. And one last thing before we do go here, it does look like we got our first hurricane force wind gust with damage reported on the confluence of the 95 and the I-4.
interesting.
75-mile-an-hour wind gust right out in front of the northern eye wall of Hurricane Milton right now. So that's just a precursor to what is likely going to be happening here. Looking like that inversion is not holding very strong right now as we go in overnight, likely because of southerly flow, keeping things a little bit warmer at the surface right now.
A couple things quickly, Sean. First of all, the
Yeah,
confluence of I-4 and 95, that's really close to Daytona.
yes, it is.
And second of all, I told you that would happen.
Although we both said that would happen, we were saying upwards of 95-mile-an-hour wind gusts up there.
Okay, fair enough.
I did just say that earlier in the live, but that's besides the point. We'll likely see increasing wind gusts as we do see that inversion layer likely being a little bit weaker than expected due to a strong southerly push coming at the surface with the oncoming eye wall of Hurricane Milton here. Likely going to be seeing, as I just said, and Derek just said, 90 to potentially 95-mile-an-hour wind gusts as the eye wall makes its way over to the east coast of Florida. But is there anything else you want to add on before we head out, or are we looking pretty steady state right now with information?
I think we're looking solid here.
All right. That sounds great. And again, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out in a private message to the Stormfront specialist here. And one of us, Derek or I, were the only two here. So one of us will get back to you as soon as we can. Other than that, have a great night, everybody. And we will hopefully not be seeing you shortly, but it does look like we will be seeing you shortly. More on that coming later, as Derek said in the last live. Have a great night, everybody, and we will see you later.
Have a good night.